Okay, so shall we start reading now? But the normal mind, yeah. Shilpa's question was, why do we go on doing that? Why do we go on when we know that we can't keep it? When we go to heaven, are we taking our property with me? Are we taking our gold with us? Or our account? We are not. So, in spite of that, we do. Why? The reason is very simple: ignorance, limitation. So that is what yoga is all about. You lose your ignorance and you lose your limitation. You see that you are one small element in the universe. The wave realizes that it is not an individual wave, it is just a part of the ocean. And that is not so easy to do. That's quite difficult, but it is done over many, many lives. Slowly, 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 every grain, okay, it goes on adding, 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 and at the end of many lives, you have this, you reach a level which is you start understanding the reality of things. That's
Means
exactly.
instead of putting faith in the divine, I put faith in the money. That money will help me when needed, and
That's
I finally I get the bitter fruit, and then I realize, okay, money will this thing also will not help me. Only divine will only help me.
that's right. That's right.
You know, in the little book, The Mother, written by Sri Aurobindo,
Yes,
there is one separate chapter on money,
that's right.
and where he says that you are only a trustee of the money which you hold.
That's
You
right.
don't possess it, you are only a trustee.
That's right.
Now,
Yes,
if you step back and see, every time we spend money, do we take permission of the Divine Mother? No, we don't.
Yeah, that's right.
Very rarely you think, oh, Mother, should I buy this or should I not buy this? Should
Yeah,
I spend money on this? We don't do that. But sometimes when you're a little conscious, you may think and ask. But we are just trustees. Just
yeah,
as a trustee cannot spend the money without justifying the use, we are using our money without any justification.
that's right.
We take the divine's permission every time because, in essence, everything belongs to the divine. And
Yes.
at the moment, the money is in the hands of the asuras and it has to be won back for the divine.
Yeah. You know that chapter money was actually a letter to Champabain's husband, okay? And he was a person who was actually uh, uh, told to collect money for the ashram. And that is why he was told also that he has to, when he is asking, there is a very interesting letter. When he is asking for money from the others, you must realize that you are asking for the divine and you should not feel, like a beggar. Because when you are asking for money for yourself, you are like a beggar. But when you are asking for the divine, you should not have that feeling that I am asking and I am belittling myself. That's the letter. And Champabain used to live with us, long ago in the 1947, 48, no, sorry, after 50, 1950. We used to live in a house where Champabain also used to live in. Champabain was this man's wife. And I have seen the original letter written to him, okay, on money. Beautiful handwriting of Sri Aurobindo, and it was incorporated into this book, small book, The Mother. It's a very beautiful. I've seen the original manuscript. Yeah. Okay. So let's start reading the chapter, okay, the paragraph. But the normal mind. Okay. Now you're asking very interesting questions. Why do we do that in spite of knowing that theoretically we know that money should not make money, money is to be used for circulation, and yet we do. Why? Because we are ignorant. And what is the reason? And why can't we say, why can't we understand that the eternal and the individual are the same? There are three errors that the mind makes, and that's what it's going to deal with one by one. Okay, so let's read the first one. But the normal mind of man, normal mind.
shall I read?
Yeah, read. Okay.
But the normal mind, which has no experience of these things that are so powerfully real to the liberated consciousness, may well revolt against what may seem to it nothing more than a mass of intellectual contradictions. It may say, I know very well what the absolute is. It is that in which there are no relations. The absolute and the relative are irreconcilable opposites. In the relative, there is nowhere anything absolute. In the absolute, there can be nothing relative. Anything which contradicts this first data of my thought is intellectually false and particularly practically impossible. These other statements also contradict my law of contradiction, which is that two opposing and conflicting affirmations cannot both be true. It is impossible that there should be oneness with God and yet a relation with Him, such as this of the enjoyment of the divine. In oneness, there is no one to enjoy except the one, and nothing to be enjoyed except the one. God, the individual, and the cosmos must be three difficult actualities. Otherwise, there could be no relations between them. Either they are eternally different or they are different in present time. Although they may have originally been one under undifferentiated existence and may eventually re-become one undifferentiated existence. Unity was perhaps and will be perhaps, but it is now, not now, and cannot be so long as cosmos and the individual endure. The cosmic being can only know and possesses the transcendent unity by ceasing to be cosmic. The individual can only know and possesses the cosmic or the transcendent unity by ceasing from all individuality and individualization. Or if unity is the one eternal fact, then cosmos and individual are non-existent. They are illusions imposed on itself by the eternal that may well involve a contradiction or an unreconciled paradox. But I am willing to admit a contradiction in the eternal which I am not compelled to think out, rather than a contradiction here of my primary conception, which I am able to think out logically and to practical ends. I am on the supposition able either to take the world as practically real and think and act in it, or to reject it as an unreality and cease to think and act. I am not compelled to reconcile the contradictions, not called on to be conscious of, and conscious is something beyond myself and world, and yet deal from that basis as God does with the world contradictions. The attempt to be as a God while I am still an individual, or to be three things at a time, seems to me to involve a logical confusion and a practical impossibility. Such might well be attitude of the normal reason, and it is clear, lucid, positive in its distinction. It involves no extraordinary gymnastics of the reason, trying to exceed itself and losing itself in shadows and heights and high half lights, or any kind of mysticism. Or at least there is only one original and comparatively simple mysticism, free from all other difficult complexities. Therefore, it is the reasoning which is the most satisfactory to the simply rational mind. Yet, is there here a triple error, the error of making an unbridgeable gulf between the absolute and the relative, the error of making too simple and rigid and extending too far the law of contradictions, and the error of conceiving in terms of time the genesis of things which have their origin and first habitat in the eternal.
Yeah, in the eternal. Okay, so it's a big para, and he is explaining what is the limitations of the mind, and he is going to tell you that there are three errors, triple error, and then one by one he is going to tell you what the errors are. So the first thing is very, very clear in this para, what he is insisting on. He is quoting as though someone is saying, yes, 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 I understand very well. Okay, the divine can take three positions: transcendent, outside the cosmos. Only he exists and nothing else. The cosmos also does not exist. There is a consciousness which one can experience in this way. The world doesn't exist, my body mind doesn't exist, only the divine exists. That is one experience. The other experience is the cosmic. Okay, that which was one has now become the many, and ultimately in the many also there is the individual. So these three things are totally different from each other. That is what our normal mind thinks because of ignorance and limitation. That's what he's saying. But he says that the unbridgeable gulf between these three is a mistake of the logical reason. Now, the logical reason is an excellent instrument for practical life. If you don't have logic and reason in practical life, you will make a mess of your life. Okay, you will all your vital desires, and we are doing that all the time. The vital is going on insisting without logic or all sorts of things. Okay, so even if we look into ourselves, we'll see that we often make that mistake. We are not logically consistent. Okay. So this is what he's saying, and he will tell you what the three mistakes are which mind makes. But at the same time, he's saying that it is absolutely essential to have reason, reasonability, rationality, and logic, essential for life in the world. But the moment you leave life in the world and go to another level of consciousness, laws change. Exactly like the laws in India are not the laws in America, okay, or in Sweden. They are different. Okay. It's very simple. It depends on where you are, which level of consciousness. The levels of consciousness can be compared to countries. Okay. Conditions go on differing. Even Einstein is telling you that. Depending on where you are stationed, you will see the world in a different way. Okay. So that's the whole point. This is something we have to understand. We mustn't think that the only way we are seeing is the only truth. It is not. Okay. That's very clear. So, with this background, shall we start reading each each sentence? It's quite clear, but still we'll go through. Okay. There may be a few things which questions may come up in our mind. But the normal mind, I'm reading the beginning of the para. The normal mind. Now, what do you mean by the normal mind? The ignorant mind, which is seeing multiplicity in the physical world and thinking that the physical world is real. Okay? And there is nothing else, which has no experience of these things. Which things? The transcendent, the cosmic. Okay, we don't have all these ideas. The subtle planes of consciousness, we have absolutely no idea. That are so powerfully real to the liberated consciousness. When you lose your identification with body, mind, life and go up, the subtler is 10 times more real than the gross. And the gross, the values become absolutely opposite. The more gross, the more unreal it is. Okay? And the subtler it is, the more real it is. The more real and more powerful also. That's what he's saying. These things that are so powerfully real to the liberated consciousness. The liberated consciousness is your consciousness losing identity with body, mind, life. Okay? And going to the higher mind or even higher. Okay, the spiritual planes of consciousness, the second level. Okay, but the normal mind may well revolt against what may seem to it nothing more than a mass of intellectual contradictions. How can one and the many be the same? How can black and white be the same? They are opposites. It's not possible that they are the same. It will revolt. Okay? But Srimad is saying, very interestingly, they may well revolt. Because sometimes we don't. We accept the reality. Okay, I accept that they are connected. Okay? The black and white are really connected. I can understand intellectually that light and darkness are connected. I can understand. But I don't see it as a reality. I don't experience it. Okay? That's the whole point. May well revolt against what may seem to it nothing more than a mass of intellectual contradictions. It may say, is the normal mind, and a huge quotation, he is telling the attitude of the normal mind, okay, in double quotes. It may say, I know very well what the absolute is. It is that in which there are no relations. Okay? The one and the many are quite different. The absolute is the one. The absolute is the featureless. The absolute is without any form, whereas the relative is with features and it is with form and it is also in time and space. The absolute is outside time and space. So this is the difference. It may well say, I know very well what the absolute is. It is that in which there are no relations. The absolute and the relative are irreconcilable opposites. Just like a static condition and a moving condition, they are opposite. The silence and the noise, the static and the dynamic, they are opposites. The immutable and the mutable, they are different. The absolute and the relative are irreconcilable opposites. In the relative, that's the physical world, there is nowhere anything absolute. In the absolute, there can be nothing relative. This is the normal mind speaking. Huh? Don't you must be very careful. You must not forget that Srendra is giving a quote. Okay? Very often people forget that Srendra is saying it may say. So you will come to all sorts of contradictions. Srendra is saying this. No, Srendra is not saying that. Srendra is saying that the mind is saying all this. So there can be anything which contradicts these first data of my thought is intellectually false and practically impossible. Intellectually false and practically impossible. But there can be something which is beyond the intellect and also which is something beyond the practical world. These other statements also contradict my law of contradictions, which is that two opposing and conflicting affirmations cannot be both true, cannot both be true. It is impossible that there should be oneness with God and yet a relation with Him. And he is explaining why. Such as this of the enjoyment of the divine. Enjoyment is always between two things, the enjoyer and the enjoyed, and the enjoyment that connects the two. So, how can they be the same? They can't. In oneness, there is no one to enjoy except the one, and nothing to be enjoyed except the one. God, the individual, and the cosmos must be three different actualities. Otherwise, there could be no relation between them. In the relative world, this is what has to happen. Now, this is in spiritual experience. Madhvacharya is saying, yes, the individual and the supreme are always different. Ramanuja is saying, yes, it is true, but the one can also enjoy. That's the whole point. Vishishta Advaita. So, God, the individual, and the cosmos must be three different actualities. God is the transcendent, the individual is the many, part of the many, and the cosmos, the universe. Must be three different actualities. Otherwise, there could be no relation between them. Either they are eternally different or they are different in present time, although they may have originally been one undifferentiated existence and may eventually re-become one undifferentiated existence. Now, the human mind is saying, okay, I make a little concession. I say that maybe all these one were, all these many in the physical world were one at one time. Like the whole tree with all its different things, roots and flowers and trees and leaves and twigs and branches and roots, were all in the seed, which is one. I admit that. Okay. But now they are not. That's what he is saying. The mind will insist on that. Now the sentence is very interesting and you have to read it in the correct way. Unity was. There was a seed, which was unity. Perhaps. And will be perhaps. Okay. It's possible that the seed will remain always a seed. It's possible. Unity was perhaps and will be perhaps even in future. Okay. But it is not now and cannot be so long as cosmos and the individual endure. In the physical world, unity is not there. That's what he's saying. The cosmic being can only know and possess the transcendent unity by ceasing to be cosmic. Okay, I even admit that the universe can, with all its multiplicity, can become one, but it cannot be both at the same time. The cosmic, I admit that it can become the transcendent, but it has to lose its cosmicity. That's what he's saying. There is the individual, the mortal mind of man thinks in this way. Can't be two things opposite all the time. The individual can only know and possess the cosmic or the transcendent unity by ceasing from all individuality and individualization. That is what Buddha's philosophy also says, and Shankara also. If you want to know the divine, you have to lose your individuality. The individuality disappears. That's not absolutely true, you know that, because Sri Aurobindo says you are losing your ego, not your individuality. It is possible to retain your individuality yet be cosmic in consciousness. That may well involve a contradiction or an unreconciled paradox. But I am willing to, Sartre is saying that the mind talks in this way, but I am willing to admit a contradiction in the eternal which I am not compelled to think out. Okay, it's possible that even in the eternal there is a contradiction. I agree, maybe. Perhaps then a contradiction here of my primary conceptions, which I am compelled to think out logically and to practical ends. It may be possible that in the transcendent all these things are compatible, but not in the physical world. In the physical world they can't be the same. Okay? Rather than a contradiction here of my primary conceptions, which I am compelled to think out logically and to practical ends. I am, on this supposition, able either to take the world as practically real and think and act in it, or to reject it as an unreality and cease to think and act. That's what the ascetic is doing. Okay? So Sri is saying, I can't be both. In both, I can't be in the cosmic and the individual consciousness at the same time. If I want to be cosmic, I have to lose my individuality. Okay. This is what the mind of man thinks. I am, on this supposition, able either to take the world as practically real and think and act in it, or to reject it as an unreality and cease to think and act. I am not compelled to reconcile contradictions, not called on to be conscious of and conscious in something beyond myself and the world, and yet deal from that basis as God does with a world of contradictions. Even the spiritual consciousness in India was of this opinion, that if you want the divine consciousness, it is not possible in the physical world. You have to leave the physical world and go there. Renunciation, okay, mukti, okay, give up the physical world. That was the idea. But Sri Aurobindo has a different take. He says, no, not necessary. You can even be in the limited and yet have an unlimited consciousness. They attempt to be as God while I am still an individual, or to be three things at one time, seems to me to involve a logical confusion and a practical impossibility. This is also the standpoint of Christianity also. The human being can never, the human individual soul can never become God. Not possible. Okay. This is what, and the quote ends here. Okay. This is the way the mind thinks. Now, Sri Aurobindo is coming to his own comment. Such might well be the attitude of the normal reason, and it is clear, lucid, positive in its distinctions. In the physical world, you must have logic and you must be able to make contradictions and see the differences in things. It involves no extraordinary gymnastics of the reason, trying to exceed itself and losing itself in shadows and half-lights or any kind of mysticism, or at least there is only one original and comparatively simple mysticism, free from all difficult complexities. In the physical world, don't be confused, there are contradictions and you can have only one thing at a time. Therefore, it is the reasoning which is the most satisfactory to the simply rational mind. Simply rational mind. Okay? Yet is there here, this is Sri Aurobindo's comment, yet is there here a triple error. The error of making an unbridgeable gulf between the absolute and the relative. This is the first mistake. That you think that there is no connection between the one and the many. There is a connection, which you don't see in the normal levels of consciousness, but you see it in the supramental. You see the connection. The error of making too simple and rigid and extending too far the law of contradiction. This is the second error. The error that contradictions are permanent. That's not true. Okay? And the third error, the error of conceiving in terms of time and space, the genesis of things. The genesis, the origin, the birth of things, which have their origin and first habitat in the eternal. So these are the three things that we have to discuss. We have 15 minutes, so we can read the next para also. The burden of what he's saying here is going into great detail, but the human mind is ignorant and cannot think that contradictions can be reconciled. That's basically what he's saying. But it can be. And the mind may even accept, that's what he's saying, the mind accepts. We all accept that what Srimati is saying is true, that the transcendent and the cosmic and the individual can exist together. But it's very difficult for us to picture that and experience that. That's what he's saying. The mind may accept, but it does not experience it. Okay? We read the next one.
Shall I read?
Shall I read?
Either of you, one of you. Okay.
I give up.
Okay. Thank you,
That's
Jasmine.
more modest. Okay, Jasmine. Soki, read.
Okay.
We mean.
Okay. We mean by the absolute something greater than ourselves, greater than the cosmic which we live in, the supreme reality of that transcendent being which we call God, something without which all that we see or are conscious of as existing could not have seen, could not for a moment to remain in existence. Indian thought calls it Brahman, European thought the absolute, because it is a self-existent, which is absolved of all bondage to relativities. For all relatives, for all relatives can only exist by something which is the truth of them all and the truth of them all and the source and the continent of their powers and properties, and yet exceeds them all. It is something of which not only each relativity itself, but also any sum we can make of all relatives that we know can only be, in all that we know of them, a partial, inferior, or practical expression. We see by reason that such an absolute must exist. We become by spiritual experience aware of its existence. But even when we are most aware of it, we cannot describe it because our language and thought can deal only with the relative. The absolute is for us the ineffable.
The absolute is impossible for the mind to describe. It is beyond words. Ineffable. It can't be expressed. It cannot be put into words. Language is too limited. That's what it is. It's very interesting, this question of language also, na? Because at the animal level, language is only sounds, inarticulate sounds. Eh? And even at the lower level, okay, there is communication. The ants and the bees also communicate without even sound. You will see that when there is a line of ants, they come and meet each other. There is some communication, but there is no sound. At least we don't hear it. And so communication first without sound, then with inarticulate sounds, then you come to human beings with sound and words. Now, when you go to the spiritual planes of consciousness, again these words disappear and only the vibrations remain. Okay? Finally, at the highest level, even the vibrations disappear because it becomes absolutely knowledge by identity. So this whole question of communication is very interesting. Okay, at our level, we have to use words. The animals don't need words; they feel the vibrations. That's why it's not very accurate always. But with words, we have more accurate. And when you go beyond the mind, again you don't use words. You see the realities. Okay, so we'll quickly go through. The last is the concluding statement of this paragraph. The absolute is for us the ineffable. We cannot express it in any way. I quickly go through the para. We can, I think, read the next one also after this. We mean by the absolute something greater than ourselves. greater than the cosmos we live in, the supreme reality of that transcendent being which we call God, something without which all that we see or are conscious of as existing could not have been, could not for a moment remain in existence. Indian thought calls it Brahman. The European thought, the absolute, because it is self-existent, which is absolved of all bondage to relativities. The word absolved, I have told you, very interesting word. Absolve is to declare innocent, declare free of guilt. So this is a judge when a accused person comes in front of him, he assesses the data in front of him and either gives him a punishment or he absolves him. I declare you free. So Sri Aurobindo uses the word in that way. So when you are in the Brahman consciousness, you are absolved of all bondage. You are free of all bondage. You are not bound by this. You cannot be accused of being bound to certain limitations. A very interesting word. So, absolved, okay, of all bondage to relativity. So, in other words, when you are in the Brahman consciousness, you are free of relativities. For all relativities. So, again, these words are sometimes confusing. What is the absolute and what is the relative? So, quickly we'll sum up. The absolute is that which is one, pure, infinite, eternal, featureless. Each word is important to understand what is the absolute. Okay? It is infinite, eternal, self-existent, featureless, immutable. And the relative is exactly the opposite. It is the many, it's in time and space, it is created, it is mutable, and it is the many, and it is moving all the time, mutable. So this is the relation between the absolute and the relative. For all relatives can only exist by something which is true of them all and the source and content of their powers and properties and yet exceeds them all. Okay? So the relatives have to exist by the absolute. It's like the reservoir of water which makes a river possible. Okay? The glacier is static and it is solid and it is immutable. Actually, it does move a little bit, but we can consider it to be immutable. But it is that which creates a river. Okay? The glaciers in all the high mountains remain static, but because the glacier exists, the rivers exist which are movement and flow. There cannot be any river without a glacier. Of course, you can always say that rain also is there. But the rain also is there. You can apply the same logic to it. Without the cloud, there can be no rivers. You can say that. Okay, so that's what Sri Aurobindo is saying here. He is saying, for all relativities can only exist by something which is the truth of them all and the source and content of their powers and properties and yet exceeds them all. And that is the absolute. The relative cannot exist without the absolute. It is something of which not only each relativity itself, but also any sum we can make of all relatives that we know can only be, in all that we know of them, a partial, inferior, or practical expression. The universe cannot exist without the transcendent. That's what it is. We see by reason that such an absolute must exist. Just as we said just now, the river can't exist without the glacier, okay, or the cloud. It has to be there. We become, by spiritual experience, aware of this existence. It is possible to experience in our consciousness that we may accept mentally, but we have to experience it. We become, by spiritual experience, aware of its existence. Okay? But even when we are most aware of it, we cannot describe it because our language and thought can deal only with the relative. Language belongs to the relative world. The absolute is for us the ineffable. That's why I was talking about communication. Okay, there is no communication in matter And in the animals, the communication is through senses, but very limited senses. And finally, in animals, there are only sounds. Okay, but even sounds are expressive. They are to a certain extent active. When you are gentle, okay, the sound is a cooing sound. But when you are angry, it can be a growl. Okay, so there is very clearly sounds also can be expressive. And finally, when you come to man, there are words which we use. And finally, when you go up, there are no words possible. That's why the absolute is for us the ineffable, inexpressible. Now we have exactly 5-6 minutes. Can we read the next one? Yasmin, can you read?
May I say something about language?
Okay, go ahead.
This is Anil Baran's talks of 1926,
Okay.
and Pavitra is asking this question:
Ah.
Are languages mental? The
Okay.
Superman cannot have a mere mental language.
That's right.
Sri Aurobindo's answer is: language is not mental; it is half mental.
That's right.
Words were not at first associated with ideas.
That's right.
Sounds are the expression of certain sensations produced in men by external objects.
That's right.
These sounds conveyed the impressions of those sensations, and that did not depend on the sound of the words, but rather on the accent, the intonation, which expressed the sensations. Gradually, as the mind developed, these primary intonations developed into language.
That's right.
Shall
That
I
is-
read the next thing also? It's very
Pardon?
small.
Huh.
Can I read the next question also?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Pavitra says, it is said that there was an original language common to all men, which in the course of time was differentiated into different languages. Sri Aurobindo's answer: originally, a word expressed many times. When men separated from each other, different groups retained different words and different senses of the words. Thus, the Greeks retained some words which were forgotten by the Indians, and vice versa. Thus, different languages arose.
That's right. Very interesting. Yeah. Communication is very interesting. That is the reason why how Sri Aurobindo is actually deciphering the Vedas. Okay. What he does is to go back to the root sound. And what does that sound represent? Okay, just as I said, a growl, okay, represents anger. Okay, it's only a sound. So Sri Aurobindo goes back to the roots. He discusses this question in the Secret of the Veda. Okay, is it possible to have a language of science? Okay, that's a question. So philology, is it possible? Can there be a science of language? Then in Europe they tried, Ernest Renan and others, they tried and they failed. But Sri Aurobindo says that was the wrong basis. You have to go to the roots of the words. In English and other European languages, we don't have the concept of roots. In Sanskrit, we have the concept of roots. Okay, each one there is a root, dhatu, okay, and that branches off into many meanings. That's it. When you go to the root, that is how we could find out the meaning of the Vedic hymns, the words used in the Veda. Okay, so it's a very interesting thing that you read out just now, and that was a discussion from Pavitrada. Okay, but that's exactly the whole thing. That is how he could do it. And he asserts that philology is possible. For philology as a science, okay, the science of language and words, you have to go to, and man is also trying to, there's a whole branch of knowledge is called linguistics. Okay, there are many who are, even in the ashram, some children have gone into linguistics. Okay, it's very interesting. How are all the languages, from where are they originating? So Sri Aurobindo says they are all originating from sound. Okay, and you can see how correct. Yeah, tell me.
Rangada, you remember many years before we have an exhibition on the each word ha, ra, ka, how these words has come.
I don't remember the exhibition, but yeah,
Oh,
that's it. That's the thing exactly. Basic sounds. First of
ah,
all, they are not even sounds; they are only vibrations. From
ah,
vibrations, sounds come, and from sounds come words, and from words, meanings, and finally you have to go even beyond the words, and you go back
ah.
into vibrations. Yeah.
We
Okay.
had an exhibition
Hello,
in ashram.
hello.
Yes, yes. Tell me.
You remember a few months ago, I had asked you this question about the article in Mother India about the Dev Bhasha. And
Yeah.
Sri Aurobindo describes that there was a Dev Bhasha
Yeah.
which is totally gone, and there is only a backbone, but the flesh and blood and everything is gone, and
Yeah.
that language is Sanskrit.
That's right.
And he said the other languages besides Sanskrit is Greek, Latin, Tamil, Persian, and not Arabic, Persian.
Yeah.
And the whole essence of Dev Bhasha was the root. And you said you would find out something more, but I think you forgot.
Yeah, I've forgotten. But I remember the question and I remember the article in Mother India. I remember that, yeah. So it's very interesting. So anyway, we stop here today and next time we have to read from so far there need be no real difficulty nor confusion. So we'll read from there. Okay?
Merci beaucoup.
Au revoir, everybody. It was a very interesting discussion.
Thank you, Rangada. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rangada.
Au revoir and have a nice day, everybody.